A very good morning to everyone, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, and passionate advocates for action. It is the final day of the Malaysian support for the COP30 event, which is a 10-day virtual journey held in conjunction with the UN Climate Change Conference in Belém, Brazil. As we are now coming to an end, we really hope that you enjoyed the various themes that were discussed over the past 10 days. The final theme for today is known as Reflections and Roadmaps. So, this theme will be highlighting insights from COP30 representatives, outcomes, and next step priorities for Malaysia and ASEAN. To kickstart our program, we'll now commence the first session titled Conversation with Dr. Gary Theseira, Chair of the Council of CGM, who will deliver the opening keynote for the session. You will then be joined by Professor Tan Sri Dr. Jemilah Mahmud, Executive Director for Sunway Center for Planetary Health. Together, they will share their final thoughts on the on the outcomes and the items that were discussed during the COP30 conference, and what are Malaysia's aims and objectives in relation to what took place during the COP30. Please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Gary and Professor Tan Sri Dr. Jemilah as they share their insights and reflections to open the conversation.
A very good morning, everyone, from a very wet and rainy Malaysia, where at least we still have the warmth and the water that we need to survive. Uh, this in comparison perhaps to other parts of the world that are feeling the impacts of climate change perhaps a bit more severely than we are. Obviously, the big news coming out of the COP is the unfortunate occurrence of fire in the blue zone. Reports say that 13 people were very slightly injured, most due to smoke inhalation. For those of you who know, the blue zone is actually the official zone of the COP, where the government officials and the negotiations take place. This in contrast to the green zone, which is the zone used more by civil society and interest groups, public and private agencies, etc. So according to the presidency, everything is under control, and there should not be any problems moving forward. Now, in terms of updates, we brought you yesterday how the BAM, the Belém Action Mechanism, is receiving a lot of attention in terms of being the first and most important draft decision put forward by the presidency. As we saw yesterday, there are a lot of news agencies that are analyzing this document, including the options that are in the text, and we see how indeed the presidency is going to great lengths, understanding the super red lines, understanding the red lines. I mean, this is a process that has been ongoing for many, many, many years, and the moment you use a phrase, you almost instinctively understand how you want that phrase or that sentence or that term to be perceived. You can almost tell which coalitions will support it fully, which coalitions have problems with it, and for which coalitions they might be a red line or even a super red line. So the options very artfully, very skillfully crafted by the Brazilian presidency, hopefully able to bring consensus to this very, very important document. Another thing that I'd like to bring your attention to is the third high-level ministerial dialogue on climate finance. It was held a little bit earlier in the week, but it's an important dialogue because it really focuses on delivery of the new finance goal. Now, this was moderated by Parliamentary Undersecretary of State Katie White, Minister of Climate Change, and Deborah Malongo, Minister of Environment for Kenya. Very importantly, the keynote address was delivered by Annalena Baerbock, the President of the 80th session of the UN General Assembly. It was a joint keynote The other speaker was Professor Jim Skier, chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, known more often as the IPCC. There were expert presentations as well. These were delivered by Avinash Prasad, Special Advisor to the President of the Inter-American Development Bank, and Arthur Cardoso de La Cerda, the Green Climate Fund. Now, apart from all of these, there was also a discussion session involving four ministers, two from developed countries and two from developing countries. Developed countries were Germany and Norway, and the developing countries were Egypt and China. And they addressed two very, very important questions. The first question, what short-term and medium-term, meaning in the time frame of 2 to 5 years, what actionable solutions will parties undertake towards implementing Article 9.1 and Article 3 of the Paris Agreement? And this of course, refer to the all-important NCQG, or the new collective quantified goal on finance. The second question they addressed, what short-term and what medium-term actionable solutions will parties undertake towards increasing adaptation finance specifically? So this dialogue on finance, a very, very important dialogue in terms of how the tone was set by the keynote speakers. And Elena said that the North Star of the quote-unquote of the Paris Agreement has guided us from a projection of 4 degrees in 2100 to something between 2.3 and 2.8 degrees. In other words, trying to contrast where we would otherwise be if we had not undertaken all the actions that we have taken to address climate change, whether successful or not. The point is, she makes that what has happened, regardless of its level of success, has shifted the global economy from a pathway that practically guaranteed us 4 degrees to one that might be slightly cooler. She made the very, very important point that in our world of abundance, and it is a world of abundance, it's not so much a question of money per se, rather it is a question of how and where this money is invested. She said that despite the progress made, a lot of potential remains untapped because capital isn't flowing where it's needed. She says 600 million Africans still live without electricity, even though the continent's renewable energy potential is 50 times greater than that of the world's projected electricity demand for 2040. She contrasted the development of electricity, for example. Africa in 2024 added only 4.2 gigawatts of renewable, 4.2 gigawatts. And this compared with Asia at 421 gigawatts. So once again, it's happening. Africa in the continent with the youngest and the fastest growing population. 60% of people are under the age of 25. So making the very, very important point that it's not a lack of money per se, it's how that is being deployed. The lament by Jochen Flasbach being that public finance should be at the core of the NCQG. The problem, he says, is that nobody here in the room doesn't want to deliver. We will continue to provide our fair share, maintaining a balance between mitigation and adaptation. But once again, like many others in the developed world, he called for the private sector to also ante up and add to the financial flows. He said that there is a desire for an ambitious outcome on Article 2.1 of the Paris Agreement and its complementary Article 9, that's the article on finance. We also had the EU weighing in, saying, and EU was represented by Denmark, saying that, agreeing that clear and consistent climate finance is required for higher or greater climate action, called the NCQG decision a framework for scaling up climate finance, once again, the line of the developed countries from all sources, including public and private, to deliver climate resilient pathways, claiming the EU was ready to take the lead, with the full expectation, of course, that others would follow. Now, these views from the developed countries did contrast quite sharply with the views from the developing world. For example, we had the Vice Minister of the Ministry of Ecology and Environment of China, Li Gao, calling on developed countries to quote unquote present an implementation roadmap for the delivery of the agreed sum, now 300 billion, including short-lived and medium-term actions for providing the necessary guarantees. And to do so, he said, we need to establish a new quantified target and implementation plan specifically for adaptation finance. He said that the delivery of this 300 billion in the NCQG would serve as an opportunity to rebuild trust between developed and developing countries, that we would need a practical roadmap for implementation, and that it was very, very important to avoid blame shifting and prevent any further erosion of the trust between developed and developing countries. The Vice Minister pointed out that while delivering on the previous sum of USD 100 billion, developed countries actually, in calculating, in assessing whether this was achieved, included excessive market rate loans, which cannot be regarded as new and additional. The result being that many developing countries do not recognize that the 100 billion USD target has in fact truly been met. The NCQG legal claim was critical for scaling up financial resources, strengthening support to developing countries in implementing their climate actions and their nationally determined contributions, and in advancing their achievement of the goals for the Paris Agreement. He highlighted that this could only be accomplished by upholding the key principles of the Convention, the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities, the CBDR-RC, and clearly defining the responsibilities and boundaries of financial support. This, of course, a reference to the importance of clearly defining what climate finance is and what it isn't. Because in this area, as we've mentioned before, there's a huge difference of opinion in what the developed and developing world regard as climate finance. In this regard, as I've mentioned before, this is one of the areas where all 134 of the developing countries in the world that constitute the group of 77 and China, the largest single coalition in the COP coalition of developing countries, in this case being spoken, in this case being represented by Iraq, said that G77 and China, he made the point that scaling up climate finance in accordance with the principles and provisions of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement forms the core of the priorities. It emphasized that the group emphasized that 300 billion remains significantly insufficient. If you recall, the amount that was estimated that was needed by developing countries was 1.3 trillion US dollars. But he called on developed countries to significantly scale up the provision of finance, climate finance, and means of implementation to enable ambitious and urgent climate action at the scale and at the speed required. He said that there was a need to address the systematic disenablers of climate finance. In this case, probably referring to things like subsidies for fossil fuels and subsidies for agriculture, things like that. In relation to adaptation finance, the G77 underscored the need to improve biennial communications submitted by developed countries to demonstrate additionality and to deliver the predictability needed for planning implementation. So if you have a roadmap for finance, according to the G77 and China, you will be in a much better position to plan your mitigation and your adaptation. In addition, the G77 urged the operating entities of the financial mechanism and other funds to at least triple their annual outflows by 2030, with a significant increase of public resources provided through some of these funds. A number of other large and important coalitions joined the G77 or echoed the sentiments of the G77, among them India for the like-minded developing countries, Saudi Arabia for the Arab group, Bangladesh for the least developed countries. Belize supported the G77 on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States, and Costa Rica spoke up and in support of the G77 and China position on behalf of the Independent Alliance of Latin American and Caribbean States, or ILAC. Right. Now, for the remainder of the hour, we're going to turn our attention to someone who's returned from the COP, and we're very, very grateful that she has agreed to be with us this morning. We have with us Professor Tan Sri Dr. Jemilah Mahmud. I believe she is the Executive Director of Sunway Center for Planetary Health. She is a physician. She is a founder of Mercy in Malaysia. We are deeply, deeply appreciative to her for joining us this morning. A very, very warm welcome, Tan Sri. Thank you for agreeing to be with us this morning. Now, the presidency, even ahead of the start of the COP, began painting a picture for us that this COP, the 30th COP in Belém, would be very different from what previous COPs looked like. In your view, what was that a true statement? Did it pan out that way?
Yeah, hi, good morning, Gary and everyone in Malaysia. I'm barely awake, but it's great to be with you today. Yes, I think in many ways, this COP felt different, very different from, well, I've only been to one COP physically, which is Dubai. And then the rest I've participated virtually. But I think from the outset, I think when President Lula set out the COP of Truth, as the grounding for this COP, it felt also like a COP of moral confrontation. I think the agenda itself was set on the right principles and values, and there's a big focus, as you mentioned, your brilliant summary, by the way, on the rights, principles and values, and but it's tainted also by on-ground corporate capture, right? And I think this has been quite evident there. I also believe that the push on the global mutual was something that was unique, but and surprisingly, it's quite paradoxical that when you have the fire, you actually saw the global mutual in action. People were actually helping each other, and almost like a symbol that we have a planet on fire. The need to come together now, is real, right? And I think that for that I felt very reflective during this COP. It was not a exorbitant, lavish COP, very humble, but kudos to the Brazilians for really also fantastic logistics and very smooth operation of this COP. But if I may reflect a little bit, Gary, on what the loser of the COP, who are the losers, I think it is still the vulnerable nations who have come there really hoping, as you mentioned, finance. That's the thing that, is being called for on the adaptation finance, and a roadmap to transition away from fossil fuels. And until last night, it was still not evident how that roadmap was shaping. What was also very unique in this COP was there was actually a Planetary Science Pavilion at the COP, and the top scientists, climate scientists were all there. Johan Rockström, Carlos Nobre, Naoki Ishii, all the top names. And every day they would come out with, the right statements to the presidency and meeting President Lula himself to really, signal, the terrible situation, and not just in terms of the climate change, but also deforestation. I think that for me was for the first time bringing those components together, because climate change alone is not the problem. Coupled with deforestation, you have that exponential effect that we're seeing now. You cannot explain the alarming rate of warming that that we are experiencing, right? So I think on that, I think it was really important. What will happen now very shortly, I think they will reconvene. As of the Wednesday deadline, it has been missed. So when they reconvene, I think that push for the roadmap is going to be critical. I'm glad that the developing world is sort of coming together, but Brazil itself, I think Brazil is not strong enough to push against the G7s of the world to say, this needs to happen. There's not also some excuses being made on the finance front. Yeah, I pause there so that we can discuss further what you'd like me to cover as well.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad that you brought up the science politics nexus. I think that's so important, particularly as we see that there is a huge pushback against the science of climate change, particularly as we know from the US. It goes without saying, but they're always eager. I guess followers that would point to that and say, "See, I told you so." But to bring all of these outstanding climate scientists together in a science pavilion, a planetary health pavilion, I think speaks volumes about about the consensus among the scientific community and how important that is. Science is really not up for a vote. I think it's been said everyone is entitled to their opinion, but they're not entitled to their facts. So very glad that you raised that.
Gary, this is the first COP that has actually addressed misinformation and disinformation. And you would have seen that a number of states have actually rallied behind a call to address this as a very serious issue in the climate discourse. So I think that honestly, I must say, I was quite surprised stepping into Belém Airport, as you will see posters and signages, "Dear fossil fuel executives, this is what you've done, kind of how many lives have been lost, and compliments of the fossil fuel industry." So I think that really courageous stand by Brazil to, despite being also a petrostate, being able to put that out very publicly in the open is actually very, quite admirable as well.
Yeah, and so once again, it demonstrates that like you mentioned Petrobras, I guess it puts on the table the fact that even though you might be a petrostate, that if you decide that you want to turn the corner on this, you want to restructure your systems that currently deliver all of these fossil products, whether it's coal, whether it's oil, whether it's gas, that it's a shift in the economy and investments in new areas and divesting from other areas that's actually going to bring this about. I always point out that Malaysia is among the youngest in terms of crossing that threshold from being a net source, sink, from being a net sink to being a net source, and we crossed that line in 2004. So we've only been a net emitter for 21 years. And when people say, you know, how do you get to net zero? I say, well, you know, how we came this way, it took us 21 years. You know, it can take less to go back the other way if
absolutely.
we are, if we are judicious in our investments and we drive them the right way. You made the point that in spite of this is an interesting segue. It can take us to the business community now. I guess the negotiations on the climate finance roadmaps have always been a rocky road for developed and developing countries to negotiate with developed countries, always saying that no, public funds alone is not going to cut it. We do need both international as well as domestic investments to come in. We need co-financing by governments, etc. There was this point made about the fact that there were an excessive number of perhaps petroleum or fossil fuel or coal lobbyists at the COP. Was that something that was very apparent or something that was subtle and teased out? Were they there to talk about their transition plans, or were they there to cut deals on the sale of new gas reserves and things like that? But what's your sense on that, Theseira?
I think it's a bit of both. I think that first of all, the numbers are high, very high, as with every COP. There's been a report from the Philippines that said that the fossil fuel lobbyists received 2/3 more passes than the 10 most vulnerable countries to climate change. And it was very obvious. In some of the pavilions, they were very easily plastered on the walls. There were some sessions that were, trying to talk about renewables, but in the negotiation rooms, the lobbyists are in there along with the government. So it's a shame actually, because I think no doubt, the fossil fuel companies are propping our economies, but I think they should not be in the negotiating rooms, right? Because I think what should be there will be the policymakers, scientists, people who have knowledge on the impact of climate change on people. So this is a shame, and I think it's the way it's been designed, the COPs, and I think a redesigning of the future COPs is actually important for us to start thinking about where the negotiation, which is primary in the COPs, should be somewhere concentrated, and then other activities elsewhere, so that we don't have to have this situation arising again. But that's the reality of national politics as well. But yeah.
No, please go ahead. Please go ahead, Theseira.
No, I think one thing that I want to highlight is there are, the two things I think that stand out. One is the finance, obviously, that you rightly pointed out. International finance is required for both the climate finance, also for protection of deforestation. So at least the Tropical Forest Fund has been established, which is good. That's a step in the right direction, certainly. But in terms of adaptation finance, how do we move away from putting low-income countries in further debt, rather than that additionality that's required in terms of finance? And we're not short of money. I mean, the world, this is where the corporate tax, that will be critical. And you rightly pointed out the absence of the USA in these dialogues is a problem because of number one, the emissions, and also the money that comes from developed countries. The other thing that I think was not talked enough about was actually the big win on health. The Belém Health Action Plan is actually very, very good. Finally, they have realized that at the end of the day, if you have a changing climate, people are actually going to get sick and die. So the Belém Health Action Plan has been very good in trying to bring together nations around the reality of health. And coincidentally, Gary, I, how everything happens in so many ways, sort of joining the dots. Yesterday, Malaysia launched the first in the world global national planetary health action plan. So I think bringing, the health and well-being of people as central to our discussions. 'Cause at the end of the day, it is about protecting humanity as well. The other thing that maybe I want to touch on was the indigenous people and indigenous knowledge. It was very, very prominent. I attended several sessions where I felt very, very humble and very guilty that we haven't given enough attention and listened enough to indigenous knowledge. And when you have the rich Amazonian sort of indigenous culture, and from other parts of the world as well, the Pacific Islands and others, it was really humbling to hear. Actually, as you said, if Malaysia only took 21 years to be an emitter, it's not that difficult to turn the clock back, because nature is so forgiving, and our planet is able to repair itself despite all the terrible things we do to it. If we just pause, take time, and commit to certain things, right, to be done differently. So I think I was really admiring the fact that when the indigenous people were protesting, they're quite loud. It was handled so well. The presidency of the COP, Andrea, is amazing. He came down, talked to them. I mean, and I cannot imagine if this was held in another country or the two previous countries before this, the heavy-handedness that would have happened, right? And it was, very well managed,
No, these are all just amazing insider views, and we are so grateful to you for sharing them with us. Of course, for me, it sparks a lot of memories. When you talk about the idea that what actually individual delegations consist of. For most of the developing countries, you will see civil servants in these roles, and oftentimes these civil servants will be generalists, because they will have their portfolio and they will have their marching orders in terms of the mandate from their government. Occasionally, you will see peppered in with these civil servants, you will see academia, such as yourself. You will also find researchers, institutions of higher learning, etc. And in my time at the COP, I would always contrast this with the developed countries. And primarily, their delegations would be lawyers.
Yes.
because ultimately, you're looking at things like the Kyoto Protocol, but you're looking at things that might be legally binding.
Yeah.
And so you find this interesting difference also in terms of the signages around the COP that were calling for suits out and all of this. I thought that was very interesting. But when you zeroed in on these three areas, I thought it was very, very wise how you put them together. That that's finance that needs to preserve the forest. You mentioned the Tropical Forest Forever Fund. In spite of the fact that China has decided not to finance it, there are other countries that are stepping up and financing it, and this very, very important link that the finance has to include finance for adaptation, despite the fact that it might not be revenue generating. But as we in Malaysia have one of the very rare forms of adaptation projects that's actually revenue generating, our smart tunnel. But not everyone, it's not for everyone, and the Philippines is in truly, truly desperate need of some kind of adaptation mechanism. I mean, how do you handle approaching 2 typhoons a month, and some of which are super typhoons? I mean, it's when you begin to talk about parts of the planet being uninhabitable. We are, I think, rapidly approaching, and that's not very far away from where we are in the world. Your reference to the Belém Health Action Plan, I think as a physician, no one could be closer to you on this. But what I have been seeing, at least in Malaysia here, a lot of the parallel events, we are seeing a greater level of participation by indigenous communities. And I find that very, very, as you say, very refreshing, very humbling, and oftentimes, when they do speak up, uh, they may not be eloquent, but they choose their words very, very carefully. And sometimes just have the capacity to reduce you to kind of a, a non-functional pile of emotions, because they have this bond with the environment around them that we seem to have lost. I was speaking with the youth constituency, representative youth constituency, uh, just 2 days ago, and I made the point that, how do you begin to improve the engagement with youth when they are so diverse? On the one hand, you have someone who's born in post-Slim or some other indigenous community, uh, growing up, in concert with, firmly linked to nature, and you've got somebody else in a condo, for whom they're being taught that basically anything below waist level is dirty.
Yeah.
So yeah, so anything below waist level, you can't put your bag down, you can't put, it's
Yeah.
so it's such a huge dichotomy, this representative was said, you've nailed it, because I'm trying to get this message across, and I can't. So we are such a fragmented society. And this really does call for healing, and what heals nature, I think you made that point very, very importantly. Nature is so forgiving, and it can heal itself, but what heals nature is nature's doctors. And if we end up damaging or destroying the mechanisms and the systems that can cause this, or can bring about this heat, then we are basically also putting ourselves in even more dire straits. I think all of these things are just wonderful insights. Do you have anything else to add? I just love listening to
Yeah,
you.
and on the indigenous, I mean, the data is so compelling, right? The indigenous people make up less than 5% of our world, but they protect more than 90% of our forests. And when I talk to them, they're gentle. They can be very angry and fiery, but their relationship with nature is one that is so gentle. They always say we don't take from nature; we are part of nature, and I think that's an important realization as well, how dependent human beings are on nature, right? That our life, it's giving us the oxygen and the water and everything else. And as a doctor, I will tell you that most of the drugs we discover are from nature.
Absolutely.
So I think we cannot destroy that, but making that link now on emissions to forests is actually very important. You may have read that we've crossed the 7th planetary boundary, but
Yes.
we also tipped the first ocean boundary, and now we're very close to tipping the Amazon boundary, and that together is going to just escalate everything else. And I think being in Belém, so close to the Amazon, actually being in Belém was strange. I felt like I was in Pahang or something. The buildings are the same. Like Malaysian towns that are a little bit disorganized, right? And you go to the Para River, and that's your entry into the forest, like like Gunung Tahan and all that. You're going into the
Kuala Tembeling.
That's right. Very similar. And I couldn't help feeling a bit of melancholia because, we in Malaysia ourselves, need to protect our forests and also, reduce our emissions. And I think how is it that we are sometimes turning an eye, on this? I think one of the things that also came out, I think we have to give credit where credit is due, and you mentioned it, that we have avoided a world of 4 degrees to one that maybe is 2.8, but that is still not safe enough for people, right, to live. But the reality is that the window that we have now to turn back a little bit and get closer and closer to 1.5 is still open. That is the important thing, that it's not closed. We need to find that, and the national NDCs that have been presented show that we now need to go, we need to tip down now, because right at the moment it's plateauing, we're not rising, and China has peaked and so forth. But scientists are telling us we need to push down by 5% now, a reduction rather than plateauing, because that's not good enough. And I think here lies the emergency. I think what I always say is we must have hope, but we must have hope with urgency, right?
Urgency,
because
yes.
without urgency, I think that's the problem.
Yeah, thank you so much. In the remaining time that we have, if we were to try to bring it down to the national level, timely, our NDC 3, we're talking finally about getting away from intensity to absolute emissions. We're finally talking about a peak. We're talking about reducing from this peak within a specific time frame. We have put 20% unconditional, 10% conditional. Your views are, is this something realistic? Peaking is a huge thing. People don't realize how difficult it is to peak because once you claim to have peaked, you cannot put a step wrong.
Yes.
because your next step either is it can only be the same or less. It's like how do you see Malaysia, and what has the global response been? Has it been like, yeah, right, Malaysia is going to do that, or is it incredulous, or is it something that they're encouraging? This is good. ASEAN should follow. What have you heard?
Yeah, I think we must commend the NRES for putting forward the NDC 3. I think that at least it's more ambitious, right? In the past, it wasn't ambitious enough. But as you and I know, in Malaysia, we can write the best policies, but we need to be able to implement them and be held accountable. So where is that accountability going to come from? How will the businesses also be brought into this mechanism to understand better? There's always a fear. We are driven by small, medium enterprise. There's always a fear that this is going to be a costly thing to do, when actually it's not. And I think, how do we turn visions from 5 years to 50 years, right? So I think people were generally very complimentary of Malaysia's NDC 3. But as I always say, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. I think we have to monitor this. We need to hold NRES and others accountable, and we need and if the ambition, the vision, and the intention is clear, then I think we can only move forward. But how do we measure the peak, as you mentioned, right? Talking about, okay, this might be where Malaysia peaks. I hope so, because this also, the other thing that Malaysia needs to think about as well is that not only our emissions, are we also causing emissions elsewhere? And I think this whole question about exploration of new fossil fuel sort of sources, I mean, we can't turn a blind eye on that. We can't say that, okay, we want to improve our NDCs and so forth, and then at the same time we go around the world exploring, and deforesting other places as well. So I think that moral integrity has to follow our ambition.
I completely agree. We have received reports that Malaysian companies are actually involved in deforestation and land use change activities in other neighboring countries. And this, having gone through what our colonial masters did with us, we should actually be much the wiser when we ourselves are investing, quote unquote, in other parts, particularly within our neck of the woods, within the Southeast Asian area, including Oceania parts. We really need to be much more circumspect in this regard. We are running very quickly out of time. Really like perhaps your takeaways from the call. What would you like to leave our audience this morning with, having been to Belém, seen what's going on there, put your finger on the pulse, as it were, of how the presidency has handled it, the various interest groups that are there, the country, the sovereign governments, always trying to balance commitments with ability to deliver, etc. What would you like to leave our audience with this morning?
I think what I'd like to say is, number one, we must listen to the science. We must also personalize, how climate change is going to affect each and every one of us and future generations. I think Malaysia can punch above its weight. Malaysia must push for maybe a regional negotiation bloc. I've heard how difficult this is because some countries in our region want to consider themselves island states rather than ASEAN, and it's convenient. So I think the hard realities of politics also kicks in.
Yeah.
And I think we need to demand from our political leadership more attention on climate change. I was quite disappointed in the ASEAN dialogues that this was not really a prominent feature. There was a missed opportunity, but I'm quite confident that Philippines will take this on, because unless you've been hit by a cyclone every week, I think when you lose everything you have, and it may happen to us as well, looking at the way the weather has changed and the climate has changed.
No, I completely, I couldn't agree more. The images coming out of the Philippines, and you have to imagine that, when you see these areas where the water has basically moved through a village and removed everything, you have to remember that everything is now in the sea. And it's going to be washing up on shores all around the world for the next 100 years. So we go from calamity to calamity, and oftentimes we are treating symptoms as opposed to root causes, and we do need to take a step back and look at that. It's been such a pleasure having you, Prof. Tan Sri. You have no idea. Thank you so much. Despite your jet-lagged condition, for being so generous and spending your time with us this morning. I'm sure all of our listeners got a great deal of insights from what you've said this morning, and just a great deal of wisdom. So with that, on behalf of Climate Governance Malaysia, do allow me to thank you from the bottom of my heart for helping us out at this closing session of the parallel coverage of the COP in Belém, in parallel with the Malaysian pavilion there. And that's another conversation we need to have on pavilions. All right.
Yes.
Thanks again. Do take
Yes.
care.
Yeah. And congratulations for a great series.
You're very, very kind, Tan Sri. Have a good day and good rest.
Bye.
Bye. Back to you, Arun.
Thank you very much to the both of you for that interesting discussion and the highlighting of the different perspectives that were discussed, especially during the COP30 discussions. So now moving on, we'd like to move on to the next session, which will be the C-Suite's highlight. So this will be moderated by Mr. Karl Godderis, the CEO of EUROCham Malaysia, together with our speaker Dato Davis Chong, Executive Director and Group CEO of Solarvest Holdings Berhad. Please do note that this is a pre-recorded session, so we will be sharing a video of their session. So yeah, shortly. Yeah, just give us a moment. Yeah.
Good morning, everybody, and a warm welcome to the last day of the CGM COP series, where also today we have a final of our C-suite highlights. Today with no less but Dato Davis Chong, who is the Executive Director and CEO of Solarvest. Good morning and welcome, Dato.
Hi, good morning, Karl. I think it's morning here. Oh, it's night here and morning for you.
Oh, it's not. It's night for you, morning here in KL. Today's topic for the final day is reflections and roadmaps, where we're gonna cover subtopics like insights from COP30 representatives, outcomes, and next step priorities for Malaysia and ASEAN. However, before we touch the COP-specific topics, Dato, I first want to kick off with you on a more personal note and also a question related to your business. But first of all, when you were growing up, can you explain how you were exposed to nature and the environment, and how do you think that has impacted the way you feel responsible for the younger generations, and more particularly the way you consider sustainability in your business decisions?
Yeah, I think it's a bit about our background in Malaysia. We growing in a small village, we enjoy a lot of nature scenery and all this. And of course, I think the things personally I feel more about is the climate change and how it changed from the past 20 years when we are kids, all this, while it becomes the environment and the climate is completely different now. And of course, I think after being teenagers, adults, and we clearly understand how that weather engineering works and how we believe in the climate change due to our human activities and global activities that increase the temperature of the global, and that cause all the climate change issue. And we are lucky enough to be in this business, in the renewable energy business, who is contributing to reduce the climate change and help on the global issue to give us, I think, to prolong us the future for the next generations. And that's where we are right now. And we are happy that we're able to play a role in this important energy transitions to reduce carbon emissions globally.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, when we look at the sustainability landscape in Malaysia across the various companies, you have, of course, a group of companies who try to do the minimum. You have listed companies who have to comply with sustainability requirements of Bursa. Then we also see companies, it's more a market-driven approach, who step into the sustainability process because they have overseas buyers who require them to do so. And then we have the, let's say, domestic champions like yourself. However, recently, I believe you signed a joint venture with Brookfield, which is a large global player in alternative infrastructure. Can you explain a bit more how working with such a large global player has further influenced your thinking about sustainability and also Malaysia's role in this case in climate change?
I think towards about 13, 14 years in the renewable energy industry, we slowly know that what is the driver and what's the anchor of the business, and when you want to do it in the bigger scale. So capital strength and financial model is the more impactful and more scalable financials model is the way forward to help us to accelerate the energy transitions. So throughout I think the evolutions of Malaysia in renewable energy from FIT, small scales, that time 10, 15 years ago, 1 megawatt is very big. And turn to now, we have probably 500 megawatt. We're going to have near to 500 megawatt AC project. That is about 700 to 750 megawatt per site. So this kind of project, when we want to go to this kind of scale, the strength and the competitiveness of the investment model, and also competitiveness in the return rate to have the cheapest cost of fund and the efficiency of deploying the fund is to set a better fundamental to get into all this big scale project, because the fund, the investment that involved is involved up to billion ringgit or $1 billion. So we need to be very competitive in that. And to that expectations, I think people like Brookfield and all this big player, infrastructure fund player, and green investment fund, that they deploy gigawatt, or they are the biggest, one of the biggest $1 trillion fund in globally. So we do believe we need to learn from them and borrow their strength to put a better speed, accelerate Malaysia renewable energy investments. So throughout this engagement in the past 1 year, with negotiating on the terms to work together, we already found that we learned a lot of new standard, different way of doing things, different perspective of looking at long-term alternative asset, especially like clean energy asset investment. So we learned a lot from there, that how to scale the capacity up to gigawatt level. So this is what we learned, and we found that we must have more this kind of engagement and player, or I think big investors into Malaysia, that to put into greenfield development and greenfield investments. Then I think what we're talking about to have probably 75 gigawatt towards 2050 to achieve our net zero target. That is very possible. That will be very confident to do that as well.
Yeah. I'm also asking this in the context of, and also over the last few days discussing COP. We're living a bit in an asymmetric world in terms of climate action, where obviously at one hand you have the current position of the United States, which is almost leaning towards denialism, and then the rest of the world who start seeing that as a baseline, and you see even the European Union now a bit downgrading its commitments. But then I hear you talk about Brookfields, where you say they take a long-term perspective and a much larger scale view on projects and investments. So you would say then there is still hope for those people who want to do more about climate action, if only on the basis of your experience. What would you say? Yeah.
I think to the point that we see how Trump changed the approach on sustainability, and we do see that there's short-term impact on the sustainability, and that involving the adoptions of high standard of sustainability framework, the carbon tax, or even the adoptions of RE100 company, and we do see that slowed down a bit. I think the most recent news is the European Union changes on the standards on the adoptions of sustainability framework, and with that also we see the direct impact of the unbundled regs, bundle regs, energy projects, and also carbon pricing as well. But personally, towards this energy transitions journey that we have, we do see short-term direction changes on certain countries. And I think now this round is about globally because of Trump, because of US is a big country to impact the other supply chain. But I do see that this is maybe just 3-5 years or less than that impact due to Trump effect. The European Union, the ASEAN supply chain, or even I think the new sector that coming from the data centers or semiconductor, that will slowly come back to adopt the normal route as we used to be having in the sustainability framework for all this to reduce carbon emissions. I don't see that U-turn is permanent, or to eliminate the importance of sustainability framework to reduce carbon emissions. I think that will be a short-term impact.
Okay, well, it's good to hear that you're definitely sticking to your guns. Now, we have you on the last day because you actually visited the COP conference in the first few days, I believe. What made you decide to participate at the first place?
I think we started to participate as to represent Malaysia Photovoltaic Industry Associations to support that time. I think is NRES as well on this event to participate in COP27. I think it's COP27 Sharm el-Sheikh, to put to the world and to the other countries to show them how much Malaysia has done on sustainability framework, on sustainability roadmap itself, and also especially in our area in renewable energy transitions. So in COP27, we went COP28, I think we skipped, and then COP29 Baku, and this year we participate as well as part of the delegates. As an energy transitions is part of the very important, I would say, is one of the major topic in decarbonizations and sustainability in Malaysia. So because we have a huge target and part of Solarvest business in Southeast Asia, so we see across 7-8 countries in Southeast Asia, Malaysia is surely in a spotlight right now for ASEAN country in the energy transitions. And we're talking to big investors, or we keep talking to policymakers. Most of the country in ASEAN actually referencing on Malaysia progress on third-party access, on on net energy metering, and now we're moving to ATAP, which is without quota, which is more open market and more open policy. I do believe that in renewable energy transition, Malaysia is one of the most advanced in the policy setting across the government in Southeast Asia. So it is good that we come here to show to our neighboring country, or even outside of Southeast Asia, that how we set policy and how we implement and execute the policy. And the adoptions of Malaysia the project deployment also is one of the best in the ASEAN. In the past few years, averagely we deploy 1 gig to 2 gig of solar installations. Of course, last year is exceptional. We have awarded 4 gig, and we do expect that this year and next year we'll be deploying averagely 2 gig to 4 gigawatt of solar installations. So these numbers certainly show that Malaysia is strong in renewable energy deployment in the region. So here we are with the government officials to share and also speak to our peers in the different countries to show them how we get this done in the last few years.
And can you explain again what do you think makes Malaysia so successful in rolling out its solar or renewable energy program compared to peers in the region? Are there particular areas that you think where Malaysia does it better, or what would you say?
I think from our analysis into Malaysia journey, I need to give some credit to the government ministry on looking into different consumer needs. It's like residential solar needs, commercial industrial needs, and also utility needs on that. So looking to the different market, then we design different policy, different framework for the specific sector. We have FIT, NEM, and now we have ATAP for residential needs. Of course, combining with that needs, Malaysia government also designed the, I would say, the carrot of the policy, that the tax incentive, the rebate of the program. So we have seen this for long, for this couple of years especially. And then we come into the CNI sector. Of course, we have GITA, we have GITE, we have GTFS as well. All this incentive for the corporate rooftop NEM or Celco project deployment. And for utility sector, we have LSS 1 until LSS 5 plus now recently. So many rounds, from 500 megawatt one round to 2 gigawatt one round for the last round. Of course, the latest one, we have CREST, third-party access to provide utility player to invest into projects, and also for them to be able to find corporate off-taker with the market competitive pricings from the willing charges that being defined in the policy. So many times I said that in the Southeast Asia or even globally, I see Malaysia is really setting the standard and bar high, a high bar at policy making. We have all comprehensive policy, which it comes with some incentive in the beginning for now. So it's kind of complete to serve different needs. That is the first factor of it. And I will say that the next factor will the implementer, the practitioner in Malaysian market is quite competitive as well, from EPCC to developer to bank financing, financial, and also the subcontractor and supply chain networks. One of the example that we see we can quote is across all the countries in Southeast Asia, when we talk about supply chain, costing, cost management, EPCC cost for utilities to CNI to even to residential as well. Malaysia has the best cost, one of the best costs compared to the neighboring country. The cost per megawatt or kilowatt that we are doing, apple to apple comparison to different sizing of the projects. We found that Malaysia has the most competitive cost for the consumer or for the industrial users. These two combinations of the successful synergy from policy making to practitioner maybe is one of the reasons that Malaysia has been so advanced in the renewable energy deployment in the last few years.
Yeah. Do you see in that an export capability for Malaysia across the region? I mean, I believe yourselves, you're also looking at projects in surrounding countries, right?
Sorry, we're talking about energy export?
No, solar projects, because you referred to the competence in keeping costs low, for example, from the practitioner point of view.
Yeah, we definitely are seeing our competitive edge in different countries. After we explore in 70 countries, we do find that Malaysia talent, the corporate governance, the management standard that we have in Malaysia, we able to leverage on the strength that we're having. We're in majority English speaking, and our legislations, our constitution in Malaysia is a good reference for us to look at the documentations on the way that we manage projects in the overseas as well. So we are starting to have projects in Brunei, in Philippines, and Vietnam as well, and now we're starting in Indonesia and Thailand as well. So on the engineering standard, we do see that we have the advantage. Of course, the most important is how well you understand the local policy and local land development to be competitive as well. But that part will be one of the major concerns of renewable energy project as well.
Okay, that's good to hear, because of course, there's been a reduction in solar panel manufacturing in recent times because of the hit of the US duties in particular, but seems like there's an opportunity to compensate it on the other side. Now, I want to get back to the COP conference. Earlier on, you said that you've been there now several times over the last few years. How would you compare the progression of these COP conferences, and also what do you expect to come out of this rounds?
If you're looking at the experience in Sharm el Sheikh and Baku, and also I think last year we have a team that this is look into the finance of the finance aspect of the carbon emission reduction or climate change issue. We want to talk about how we finance all these energy transitions. I think in Baku we talk about mobilizing the 1.3 trillion annually on the energy transitions project from developing country funded by developed countries, which the Article 6 is one of the most debatable topic in COP. And this COP, I think they are moving gear from talking about financing to implementations, more focusing about how to deploy the fund effectively on all the energy transitions or decarbonizations projects. So of course, there are different topics being discussed in the COP, whether deploying the funds in the energy transition project or in the carbon markets as well. So there are many topics to talk about implementation this round, rather than just talk about raising funds or where the funds coming in. And I think another topic that very relevant to the team this round, which is Amazonia COP30, is to talk about how to reduce deforestation and also moving away from fossil fuel as well. These are the difference, the highlight or the difference of this COP versus the COP29 or COP28 last time.
Yeah, but do you have a sense, since the discussion was around moving away from financing more to implementation, that has brought up a new sense of urgency and a focus on action? Or what do you think is going to happen? Are we just going to have the next COP next year? As a practitioner yourself, what do you think is going to happen?
I think throughout 3 or 4 COPs that I'm joining, the COP always bring out the important topic, the key agenda at that time, during that year. But it's important for all the practitioner, all the stakeholder that joining the COP, whether that is from policymaker or from the industry player. It's important to be proactive, to carry on the agenda that we discussed in COP, then to put into action network in implementing what we have discussed and the problems that we mentioned in the COP, or even the collaborations, the people that we met, from different background and different projects, a different way of doing decarbonizations effort. We need to go back. After we go back from COP, we need to still engage, still go further in the collaborations, then to put it to actions. And I think throughout the few years that from no experience in COP to having a few years of experience, meeting different people in COP, I think it's important for us to get that kind of network and exposures in COP, so we can continue the actions in the whole 1 year after that. And it needs to be proactive by all specific, whether you are a policymaker or like us. And if you don't, in fact, nobody will push you to do it as well. So that's I think that's a learning that I have. And the more times that we come to COP, actually we will be able to differentiate and get into the right focus on, okay, what kind of people that we want to meet in COP, what kind of topic that we talk about this year. And when we meet certain people, then we know that, this is a good learning, this is a good sharing of the projects, then we will continue to contact them and to get further informations, or even get collaboration, invite them to Malaysia as well to put into actions. And it does, we do things differently from last time to now. So that's an advancement from the few COPs.
Okay, and beyond what you just described in the solar energy, do you see a bigger role for Malaysia? And I mean, including Sarawak as well, obviously, to carry forward the action points of COP to a more ASEAN-wide platform. How would you see Malaysia positioned there?
Well, I do see that other than energy, renewable energy or energy transitions that we can do more, we can certainly move gear up in the carbon market as well. We look at BCX, we look at ENERGEM, we look at the carbon tax that's coming, that carbon accounting framework that we're coming out. I think we are not ahead a lot. We are advancing in that part, but I do think that if we accelerate the effort in a carbon market, developing carbon market, regional carbon market, we probably can be the leader in setting up carbon market in Southeast Asia. And also, we're talking about ASEAN Power Grid as well. So that will be part of the regional or multilateral carbon market that we can establish if we're able to materialize the APG network as well. I see a lot of opportunity in ASEAN carbon market because we are one of the most important supply chain for semiconductor, for data center that coming up. So decarbonizations on this important supply chains is a must in the upcoming few years.
Okay, very good. Dato Davis, we have reached the end of our discussion. I thank you very much for this insightful conversation. And I also wish you a very good trip back to Malaysia. Thanks again.
Yeah. Thank you, Karl.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And with that, we would like to thank the both of them, even though they're not physically here in this session today, but we would like to truly thank them for giving us a very interesting discussion to hear more about and to learn more from too. So now, having said that, we would like to move on to the next session, which is the NGO Pavilion by WWF. So today's keynote speaker from WWF would be Mr. Manuel Pulgar-Vidal, Global Leader for Climate and Energy for WWF International. Again, he's also not here physically, so we would like to share with you his pre-recorded remarks. So just give us a moment, yeah, to welcome him.
I am so delighted to be with you here in COP30 with people of Malaysia. So I would like to describe where we are and how much expectation we do have for the end of this COP. We started this COP with optimism. Brazil had launched strong and very good ideas and initiatives. They created circles to try to create momentum into this COP. They appointed special envoys and they decided to promote what they call the Mushirao, all together working a collective vision and collective action. So now we are in the COP, some days ahead of ending it, and the point is how much we are progressing. Let me say something. I think that this COP will end in a very successful way. And why? Because I think that this COP is showing something that it is so important. This, that used to be a political process, it's becoming mostly an economic one. So it is because of the economy that it is taking more climate considerations that we will be more able to show the way forward. It's the economy that will continue pushing different actors, the academia, business sector, civil society, and for sure government, to fulfill with our climate clear objectives. And this is why I think that this process and the fulfillment of the climate objective will be driven with an unstoppable and irreversible process. So that is fantastic. And I think that Brazil is doing great in that side. But also Brazil has, for the first time ever, brought into this debate the ethical side, the moral imperative, something that used to be missing in the climate process. We know that climate change, it is an ethical thing, not only because we have created the problem. Human beings have been responsible on creating the consequences of climate change. So that is why it must be in our hands by using the values of justice, solidarity, respecting rights, among some others, that we have to act as a way to reverse what we have created and that it is affecting mostly the vulnerable people and the poorest one. So we have developed the economic side, but now also we are having the ethical and moral imperative side. But Brazil is also working in connecting climate, biodiversity, and land. It is promoting synergies within Rio Convention because the idea it is how can we promote more policy coherence and how can we be more effective by developing action that can have multiple positive consequences. The discussions around synergies it has taken in this COP and it has gotten a strong traction. And that is fantastic because let's imagine Malaysia. I know that authorities that have to prepare plans for the Biodiversity Convention as the MBSAPs or for the Climate Convention, the NDCs, the National Adaptation Plan, as well the long-term strategy, and for the desertification one, would prefer to be more effective by developing a well-integrated plan that can address the multiple crises of this planet and that can promote more policy coherence and more effectiveness. Economy, the ethics, and as well synergies are three pieces of this strong debate. And Mushirao, it's something so important because Mushirao it is let's work all together toward fulfilling with those objectives. And there is an additional element, the action agenda. I used to be president of COP in 2014, COP20 in Lima, Peru. And at that time, we launched what it is called the action agenda. That in the beginning, it had as purpose to convene actors, mostly from the business sector, to have them organizing transition, to have them defining targets, to have them working in a framework, in a clear framework of credibility and accountability. Then, in a second phase in Glasgow, in COP26, a new plan that it was mostly focused on triggering more climate action was developed. And now Brazil is approving a 5-year plan, and that 5-year plan is aiming to show how much we are progressing and how much we will continue to do it. Let me finish by talking about two important things on this COP. The phasing out of fossil fuels and the end of deforestation. We are expecting to have by the end of this COP a clear roadmap with more clear timelines to phase out fossil fuels because there is no way to implement the Paris Agreement. It is not by at the same time phasing out fossil fuels. Unfortunately, things are happening in policies, things are happening because of technology, things are happening because of decision of courts that are pushing towards that transition. But also we have to develop a roadmap to end deforestation. In the COP in the UAE, we decided to halt and then to stop and to end deforestation. But to do that in a more effective way, we have to have a roadmap because that transition to end deforestation, it must be fair, equitable, and well supported. You from Malaysia can strongly contribute to those two key objectives, to phase out fossil fuels and to end deforestation, because that is what the world needs. It is to cut those sources of emission that are creating a problem. I hope to see you soon, soon, in any time soon, because I think that this conversation it is something that we deserve to have. How can we contribute to continue achieving our objective, and how can we be more able to address the climate crisis? I wish you all the best time here in COP in Belém or in your own country, because all together we will be more able to succeed in achieving climate objectives. Thank you.
Even though he's not here today, but we would still like to thank Mr. Manuel for giving a his short and brief remarks, and yeah, giving us a lot of insight into what he discussed. So now we'll like to move on to the next session. So this is the Live from Belém segment in Brazil. So this is done by the Boston Consulting Group. So the speaker for today is Mr. Edmond Rhys Jones, who's the partner and director for the Climate Policy and Regulation, representing the BCG office in London. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to you, Mr. Edmond.
Nice to be with you again. Apologies for the slow moment while I pull up my slides. It's been an interesting day here in Belém because there was unfortunately, there was a fire at the venue today in the middle of negotiations, and the entire place was evacuated. Fortunately, no one was hurt. There are 6 people being treated in hospital for smoke inhalation, but the venue has been closed ever since. So we've had a disrupted day on both the negotiation side and on the action agenda side. But as I say, fortunately, no one's been hurt, and we will resume negotiations tomorrow with everyone getting back into the venue. I was going to talk to you, building on the conversation we had yesterday. I wanted to share a little bit more of what has been done on the action agenda. But maybe I thought, for those of you that are not with us here in Belém, I thought of the treat I might start with a little bit of a sense of what it's like here, with some of the images from the last couple of weeks. You can see there, I think probably the most famous of these images is the one on the far right, which is Ambassador de Largo with an indigenous child who was part of a protest that happened outside the COP last week, and the ambassador went out. It closed down again. It prevented people entering the venue, but Ambassador de Largo went out and actually spoke to the group. The groups that were protesting and had come down the Amazon in a flotilla of boats the day before. And there's this rather nice image here of him holding one of the children while speaking to the leaders of those communities. In terms of some of the key numbers here, it's the second largest COP according to registered participants that we've ever had, just below COP28, but higher than last year in Baku. We've had 57 members of heads of state, and this has gone up significantly in the last week or so. We've now got 115 nationally determined contributions. Those critical national emissions targets for 2035 have now been submitted. That's about, I think it's something like equivalent to the additional of 20% of global emissions has been submitted since the COP started. So very late, but better to have them here than not at all. As discussed, there are really kind of 3 key parts to the COP every year. This one's been a little bit different in terms of the timing, but we kicked off with that World Leaders Summit where we had government leaders here. We've then been running in parallel with the action agenda and the formal agenda at the bottom. The formal agenda is really the negotiations and the other formal parts of the process. I talked through yesterday a little bit about the key issues that were still on the table. Since then, one issue appears to have been resolved, which is the agreement between Turkey and Australia about where the next COP will be held, and it has been agreed that the COP will be held in Turkey, on the coast. There is still some ambiguity about the role that Australia will play in that COP. It seems like they will have some kind of official role, but the exact perimeter of that, scope of that role is unclear and still to be agreed between the 2 sides, and then to go forward to the COP for discussion. And Australia has said that whatever role it does have in that COP, they will be making sure that they partner with the Pacific Islands as they had intended to do. Actually, one which may be of interest to you because you're closer to the Pacific Islands than I am, but one idea is actually to run what's called the pre-COP, the head of the main meeting, to do a pre-COP in the Pacific, maybe Vanuatu, maybe Fiji, and have it focused on oceans, which is obviously a critical part of the agenda that's come up particularly this year. But today, what I wanted to talk about was really that action agenda piece, that all the work that's done between smaller groups of governments, civil society, businesses, to drive progress over the 2 weeks. There've been, I think there's been progress across the agenda. And actually, what I'm going to do, sorry, these are materials that we're putting together kind of as we speak, for publication on Monday. Maybe I'll start here. So the way the action agenda this year has been created is what's called it's been known as the 5+1 axes of the action agenda. And all of this has been inspired by the global stocktake, which was the process that was concluded in Dubai at COP28, where the world came together and said, this is what we together collectively need to do to put climate action back on track. The most famous paragraph of that was paragraph 28 on the energy transition, which included statements around tripling renewables, doubling energy efficiency, transitioning away from fossil fuels, methane, and other green technologies and priorities in the energy sector. But it was much broader than that. And what the COP presidency did this year, which is quite, I think, both innovative and a tremendous step forward, and I'm speaking as someone who has worked for several COP presidencies who have always started with the sense of how do we divide up the climate problem, what are the buckets, is to actually say, look, let's settle on a structure that we can all work to for the next 5 years, at least, into the next global stocktake. And they set out these 5+1 axes. So we've got axis 1, which is really focused on mitigation, transitioning energy, industry, transport. 2 is a mixture of mitigation and adaptation around forests, oceans, biodiversity. 3 on agriculture and food systems. Again, this is one which is mixed between mitigation and adaptation. Then we have cities, infrastructure, and water. So again, a mix, I think more around resilience than the mitigation piece, but critical elements there, really around the built environment, the built human environment. Then 5 is what's known as human and social development. So this is where you find a lot of the topics around, jobs and growth through the energy transition, around protecting the economy, and including some kind of narrower topics, but important, for instance, around protecting cultural heritage and so on, which is important for countries that are facing threats in that category. And then we've got a big bucket of kind of cross-cutting topics that are really like, think of them as the enablers with a couple of exceptions. So this is around delivering finance, really around kind of the broader finance question, the private finance question. Carbon markets are in there, carbon pricing, all of the technology enablers around developing and disseminating technologies, capacity building, technical assistance, particularly into the global south, but more broadly. And then the other piece which is in there, which is particularly important, is a kind of pet priority of mine. It should be a pet priority for all of us, is methane. Methane has accounted for 0.5 degree of the 1.1 degrees that we have experienced to date, and is probably our biggest lever to reduce warming in the near term. So all of the methane pieces sits in there, but methane sits across energy, it sits across farming, it sits across waste. So that's why it's sitting in that bucket. So, it's fantastic. We now have this structure. And what's going on behind this structure is, and won't show you that because it gets quite detailed, but there are 30 key objectives that have been set out around what we need to achieve in each of these areas. And beneath those, the presidency, and I'm proud to say with the support of my colleagues at BCG and myself, have identified initially 800 initiatives that were in this space. We then actually identified that really only 400 of them were still alive. So we've got 400 initiatives. We've got a huge number of solutions sitting under this space. Plans to accelerate those solutions have been developed with initiatives collaborating together, organizations collaborating together around forests, around oceans, around critical minerals to drive this thing forward. And then we've begun to develop KPIs, so key performance indicators, to check whether we are on track as a community against these objectives. Now, as I share it with you, I think it's worth just taking a moment to recognize that in some respects, this action agenda is more mature than what we have on the formal agenda. Because on the formal agenda, we still don't have KPIs for adaptation. We don't have a comprehensive set of KPIs across the climate action agenda, including mitigation, finance, and so on and so forth. Whereas here, because it's like-minded, ambitious countries, businesses, civil society organizations, communities, we're able to move a little bit faster. It's not complete. It's not all at the same level of maturity. I think just in terms of kind of really stepping up to saying, this is a global transformation, we need to get structured, we need plans, we need KPIs, we need to hold ourselves account. Huge step forward. So quite exciting. Maybe because I'm on this page now, I can show you the point on the right-hand side. To date, business has not been directly involved as a kind of direct stakeholder into this space, but there has been the involvement of many business organizations. So, WBCSD, for example, has been one organization we've worked closely. One of these, some of these businesses has been involved from that perspective. I think going forward, there is many more opportunities for business to get involved in this piece. So firstly, getting involved with either the organizations that represent businesses, bringing more of those organizations into play, getting involved in specific initiatives on specific value chains. There's opportunities to invest. I think there's also quite a lot of opportunity to learn. I mean, as I say, this is known as the granary of solutions. Of all the solutions that are out there is publicly available, and there may be opportunities for you to look for solutions that meet your decarbonisation needs. So let me. So this was the launch event of the Action Agenda, which happened yesterday. You can see it's a rather joyful picture. The nice thing about this event was that we not only had the team that put this all together, including Dan Yoshpe, who's the Brazilian high-level champion for climate action, who's a widely respected, successful businessman who came in to take this role last year and into next year. But we also had Simon Stiel, the executive secretary for the UNFCCC Secretariat, standing up and saying, hey, actually, the action agenda is not a sideshow. It is an integral part of what we're trying to achieve together at COPs. It is part of the process, which frankly, was not where we were when I first started going to COPs in 2019 or before that. So that sense of kind of maturity has really come through. And if bonus points for any of you that can spot me in the picture. Okay, now let's share a little bit. I think we're coming up to time relatively rapidly, but I just wanted to also just share amongst all of that kind of process and maybe a little, if it sounded a little bit self-congratulatory, apologies, but it's been a good week from this perspective, but maybe share a selection of some of the concrete outcomes that have been delivered at this COP, just to give you a sense of the breadth and quality of the work that's underway. And as I say, this is a selection. The piece that we'll put out on Monday, which is something that we do every year after what we've done over the last kind of 5 years after every COP, will give you much more detail around, I think, around a dozen of the areas that the Action Agenda has worked on. Why does it matter? What are the key outcomes, implications for business? But I want to give you a selection here. So firstly, energy and industry, I won't read through the whole lot, but let me just give you a couple of highlights. So look, I think on energy and industry, one of the flagship things that was launched by the Brazilian presidency was around this commitment to quadruple sustainable fuels by 2035. Sustainable fuels like hydrogen, ammonia, SAF, biofuels. There's a wide range of them. They are a significant part of what is required to decarbonize some of our hard-to-abate sectors, some of our transport sectors. Brazil is a leader in this space, and particularly in the biofuel space, where it makes up a significant part of the decarbonization of light road. And this is a commitment with, a small number of countries, but some heavy hitters. And the books are still open for more of them to join that push to quadruple sustainable fuels, and there's commitments under there around standards and so on and so forth. Maybe one to highlight on forests and indigenous communities. So another big flagship piece for the Brazilian government was around the Tropical Forests Forever facility, the TFFF, which was launched with $5.5 billion of public funding. The target is to get that up. I think it's 25 billion is the target. It's an innovative financial mechanism where essentially they're looking to take that public money, crowd in private money into a bond, which will then produce a return, which can then be used as a kind of revenue stream to pay forests that have, to pay countries with tropical forests, not just Brazil, others, to pay them to essentially protect and restore. I think it's $4 per hectare is the ballpark figure for that. So this is exciting for two reasons. One, because it is absolutely critical we conserve and restore tropical forests. EUROCham was talking about this today, because at the moment there's a risk that those forests will stop becoming a carbon sink, where they pull carbon out of the atmosphere. If they deteriorate much more, there's a risk they become a carbon source, because they burn or they rot. And we're beginning to see early signs of that. So this is really critical. The other reason this one's important is that it is because it's innovative. If this works, I think it gives people faith that we can find other innovative ways of getting the kind of public and private money together to get this kind of difficult to fund activity done. On the finance piece, this is a big, broad agenda. We've had a mixture of, new de-risking tools being brought to bear by the multilateral development banks, some of the development financial institutions. I won't get into all of those, but there's half a dozen new things coming out there. Brazil launched what's called a super taxonomy. So green taxonomy is around determining what is green, what is not green for companies, so that you can then get green investment into activities. They've launched a super taxonomy that tries to align that. So if you're a green investor, you're not having to mix and match different taxonomies across different jurisdictions. You just get on with finding good investments. Last two, adaptation and resilience. As you saw from the previous slide, it's kind of embedded across that 5+1 pillars. We've had a mixture of bringing more money to bear. There is the rate of growth of A&R funding is impressive, but it is from a very low bar with a very long way to go. It'll also be a big part of the negotiations, whether we can get a commitment to triple A&R funding going forward. There's also been, I think there's been quite a lot on the A&R agenda, and we should kind of keep it separate in your mind. There's a lot on the public A&R agenda. There's also a lot on the private A&R agenda. So how can we make the business case for businesses to invest in adaptation and resilience? It's sometimes harder because it's not a revenue generating asset that you're investing in. You're avoiding future costs, reducing risk. That's harder to build a business case around, but there's been quite a lot of progress there, particularly with the insurers at this COP. And then, excuse me, lastly on carbon markets, this has been a mix of progress on voluntary carbon markets, for instance, the shared principles from 18 countries, so that we get high integrity credits, but also compliance carbon markets. Some of this is very processy, but really important. So this piece around the GHG protocol and ISO have common accounting standards. So if you're a company in multiple jurisdictions, you can count your carbon in a way which is consistent, whether you're dealing with an ETS in one country or a CBAMS in another country. Again, just reducing the friction to getting this work done. I will stop there. Very happy to take any comments or questions. I know Edmond's waiting patiently for his agenda item as well.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Edmond, for the remarks. Thank you for that. So since there's no questions, we'd like to move on to the next session, which would be the Industry Pavilion by the UNDP. So yeah, this session will be led by Mr. Edward Verkic. He's the UNDP's resident representative to Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei Darussalam, who will be giving remarks for the session. Please let us hand it over to Mr. Edward.
Thanks very much, Adin. Edmond, thanks. Hard act to follow, mate. I think you covered a lot of ground that I was going to touch on. So clearly we're all following this very closely. Very happy to take questions throughout. I've got just a bit of a reflection on the last week or two, really drawn from a UN and a UNDP perspective and looking at applying some of that or what it might mean for Malaysia as well. I think the week started, or the event started with us with the SG trying to consolidate climate action through UNDP for the UN system, which was an interesting development. I guess we'll see how it goes. The point I would make is there's more than enough heavy lifting for all of us on this. Just kind of following in the spirit of Edmund's remarks and reflections, I think it's important to flag a few things. There has been some good progress in this, and I think that's really down to Brazil's positioning as the chair for COP30. There is a long way to go, and I think some of the fracture lines that we've seen for the last decade continue. There has been some pretty substantive movement on political and technical tracks, certainly, and again, the Belém political package is going to be important. I think progress, the momentum building in through some of the work that we've done on the G35 effort with respect to adaptation, NDCs, mitigation, etc., particularly around the enhanced NDCs and trying to get a group within the global community to lift aspiration. Malaysia was part of that push to submit NDCs that were far more aspirational than may have been felt for or intended 12 to 18 months ago. And certainly in that spirit, I think it's delivered a bit of a critical mass, and that was certainly something that laid the groundwork and the foundations going into Belém, I think, with the SG and President Lula. So that was working quite well. On NDCs, it's been pretty good. I think our analysis internally, back of the envelope, is that on current trends, we can expect a sort of 12% or thereabouts fall in carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions. The curve is starting to bend in the right direction. Still a long way to go, but certainly an improvement on where we were, I guess, 5 or 6 years ago. The impressive stuff for us is the movement on loss and damage. I think that has always and will continue to be absolutely sensitive. The following on from the Barbados implementation modalities, that initial allocation is positive. I think there's a long way to go. I guess one of the personal reflections I'd make is that there is this particular COP has seen the push for financing, which is important, but we've got various mechanisms developing. And I know from my own experience and that of our organization that sometimes that does lead to a little bit of fragmentation and different posturing and plays into geopolitics. I think it's a space to watch. Just on that, the impressive stuff from us has been the emerging coalitions. I think the Global South, while not always necessarily playing ball, we've seen India and others in the past sort of make negotiations tricky. The fact that new coalitions are emerging, the TFFF, which we've been quite involved with under Brazil's leadership, has been, I guess, the standout. Its capitalization at the moment on public financing is good. Just picking up on Edmund's point in the previous speaker, the question continues to remain on private financing and what's often called blended but poorly understood and poorly defined. I think from our side, there's a couple of questions on this matter of private financing, and this has been a persistent and structural concern. One is the definition. Two is demonstrating that nature-based solutions and investment in decarbonisation adaptation really can create some sort of revenue stream, and that's a question about turning it from income into asset. And then there's the question of incentives. And I know in Malaysia's context, this is hotly debated as it was in ASEAN, but that question about what will incentivize a shift in the normative frameworks, but also the financing flows becomes very important. The work on the MDBs is good. I think the pledges into the new mechanism that they've established on restoration is about 130 million. That's well short of where it needs to be, but it's a good start. I think what worries us a little bit, if I'm frank, is that we're still in pledge land, not necessarily in flow land. That's always a challenge. And then, of course, we're really now at the pointy end of the COP. There's a lot of shuttle diplomacy. My colleagues in the UN overnight have been sort of sending back dispatches. There's a lot of shuttle diplomacy on at the moment and a lot of effort from President Lula personally to make things going. A couple of challenges, I think, to be fair, there's still no clear consensus on fossil fuels. That's not to be unexpected. I think we've got over 80 countries now coalescing around this call for a transition roadmap is important. The parties are still divided, but it's a good step. It places us well for COP31, which the Turkey have secured the rights to. Interestingly, Australia will lead that negotiation. That will be the first time that that's happened, as far as I'm aware. We're seeing a lot of efforts from the presidency to try and bridge the positions, but the sharp differences on that question of roadmap and fossil fuel transition remain. There, of course, is the finance shortfall. Just a little factoid overnight. Again, this is internal back of the envelope stuff. The Baku to Blim roadmap, other analysis point to, highlight the large gap. I think the sort of figure that they're looking at the moment is 3.2 trillion needed annually for low carbon, climate resilient development. At the moment, we're well off that. To give you a metric on ASEAN, for ASEAN to reach decarbonisation by 2050, as a group of countries, they need to spend about 200 billion a year. At the moment, we're doing about 12% of that annually. So we're a long way off that. And finance will continue to be key. I think in the current geopolitics, it will not only be key, but growingly sensitive. There's a persistent divergence in adaptation tracking. I think parties continue to remain split on whether to adopt a formal set of indicators for the global goal on adaptation on GGA or to keep revising through until 2027. I think the question around tracking and reporting is a persistent problem, and the divergence on that and the at times kicking cans down the road on questions of definition and commitment is an issue. And then, of course, there's the one that we've been watching very closely, which ties into finance flows, incentives, and markets, is the unilateral trade measures. So there's a group of like-minded developing countries have raised some pretty serious concerns about restrictive unilateral trade measures. This has really come at a time of sensitive geopolitics. I think the sort of facade of that is the tariff war that we're seeing around the world and the way countries are posturing and positioning around that. But if you unpack that, what that means for repositioning in markets and entering new markets. So that's always going to be something that we will watch closely, but certainly it's really where the rubber starts to hit the road for many emerging economies in particular that are looking, as Malaysia is, to pivot from an upper middle income country to a high income country. On converging points, there's a couple of common areas, and they tend to be intra-COP, if you will. The calls around, the rhetoric around implementation and equity and urgency persist. I think a lot of national statements strongly converged on the need for urgent, equitable action, translating commitments into implementation, etc. There is the continuing and growing focus on adaptation. We know that at the moment, globally, only 5 to 10% of some of the money pledged is going into adaptation. I think the question about 1.5, while sensitive, if you read the science on this, it's pretty clear we've missed that target and we're on track for sort of 3.2 to 3.5. For Southeast Asia and Asia more broadly, that is quite catastrophic vis-a-vis economic development and social mobility. So we'll continue to watch that closely. And then there is the sort of broader support for accelerating sectoral shifts. As Edmond pointed out, this pivot towards or wanting to address things like sustainable fuels, but also a growing recognition of other more damaging gases, methane. There's the work around methane planning and addressing methane, regenerative landscapes, very important. The question about public-private partnership is growingly important. I have been talking to many partners here in Singapore and Malaysia about this. I think there's a lot of goodwill. I think the question of how you do it and what it looks like is a return on investment for the private sector, which is how they will measure these things, it remains a bit of a challenge. On diverging points, I think fossil fuels and transition maps, there's still that split. The question of language and agreed text, there is a tendency to default to agreed text in an environment that's very dynamic globally. I think that question of prescriptive language and timelines continues to be a thorn in the side of many countries and negotiators. The question on the scale of financing required and timing, the South or developing countries and emerging economies will continue and have and should be rightly pushing for immediate and predictable flows with clearer commitments, particularly tied to or falling from Article 9.1 under Paris. I think we shouldn't lose sight that while much of this negotiation tends to focus on the schedules around 2, 3, and 6, Article 9 continues, and that really, for those of you that are not familiar, is really about the flow of predictable financing into adaptation mitigation efforts. The trade measures versus climate action, that continues to be a divergent point that follows on from one I made earlier, and then there's the formality of indicators and reporting. We did do a little bit of work overnight to look at what this would mean for Malaysia. I think that in the spirit of, I guess, being the rep here, it's probably important to start thinking through what it means as we head into Turkey for COP31 and as we round out COP30 under Brazil's presidency. The political package outcomes, we're clearly watching that really closely. I haven't caught up on the absolute latest on that. But we do anticipate, based on previous efforts, that we will see, compromise language emerging, not just on commitment, on targets as well, and timelines. I think Malaysia will need to continue to chart its own path forward. The question around, particularly under Malaysia's chairing of ASEAN, highlighting the importance of predictability, sustainability, but also looking at reducing barriers to entry and pivoting towards green economic development. That is something for many of the economies in this region in particular will take time for two reasons. One is a number of hydrocarbon dependent. Malaysia's economy is one. The other is the push for industrialization, which continues to be seen often as the best pathway to high income. I think in the modern that's debatable. It's probably a discussion for another day. There is the question around loss and damage and the finance around that. The call to operationalize that's important. I think for Malaysian regional partners, there's going to be a lot of devil in that detail. I think questioning frameworks and direction, but also tracking eligibility modalities and pipelines is going to be really important for how and which countries can access financing for loss and damage and ultimately for adaptation. And then there is, of course, the financing windows and what some of the burdens will look like for access, but also for implementation and reporting. On Malaysia's focus, I think what we saw was very much a continuing commitment. Malaysia's led much of the region on wanting to do this, and it's walking quite the balancing act, considering its own economic composition and its own sources of revenue. I think there are opportunities around some of this financing. Again, my sense is, and I think the sense of many of my colleagues, is much of the financing will be conceived of the system overseas countries or lower income countries. I think countries that are in the middle there, like Malaysia, like Thailand, will have a strong claim to greater adaptation financing, particularly where, as you pivot from upper middle income to high income status, you do, historically, we know that countries in that position have a whole set of vulnerabilities that are difficult to deal with. Just in rounding up, a couple of next steps that we'll pursue here. We'll clearly continue to talk to government about sort of entry points for us. It's good to see, and I welcome, Gary and others on the climate network here. It's a great initiative. We'll continue to work there. I think one of the things that we are seeing is a re-prosecution of interest from the global vertical funds in working in Malaysia. We have been approached by Adaptation Fund and others to start looking at what we can do in Malaysia, so we'll continue to work with partners and government. And I think on us more broadly, we are also working with the Philippines as it moves into its chairing of ASEAN for 2026 and Singapore in 2027 to continue the momentum moving forward from what's come out of this. I think for us, just a couple of facts to finish off my little segment. The NDCs, just to give you an update, we see the 113 parties have submitted their third iteration of the NDCs. That is pretty good. That equates to about 113 parts, 113 countries. The first funding call on loss and damage has been absolutely great. I think the 250 million initial allocation reference, we need to watch that. We've seen pledges not be met by substantive financial flows and commitments. The emergence and the push for national adaptation plans is good. I know Malaysia has announced intention, and we'll be working with them on that. And I think the growing sense of looking at emissions and adaptation, but also the cross-cutting nature of that has really gained momentum. I think moving forward, what is something of particular interest to us is the way that this plays itself out vis-a-vis economic opportunity, the pivot towards just and green transitions, and I include blue in that, but fundamentally what that means for everyday well-being of Malaysian citizens. Arin, I'll leave it there, but happy to take any questions.
All right, so seeing as there are no questions right now at the moment, thank you so much, Mr. Edward, for joining us on the very last day of today's session. Means a lot that you joined us, and thank you so much for giving those short and brief insights too. So now, we are now moving on to one of our final sections also, which is the concluding remarks, which will be done by the former Minister of Natural Resources and Environmental Sustainability, YB Nik Nazmi Nik Amal. I'm sure some of you may be very familiar with who he is, so let's please welcome him in delivering the closing keynote address.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, CGM, for inviting me. Obviously, I'm in KL, not in Belém, for COP30. And I think, it has been a challenging year globally. We went into COP, with knowing that the US has again withdrawn from the Paris Agreement. And at the same time, in Malaysia's perspective, we are chairing ASEAN. So, my stand has always been that we need to leverage better on ASEAN. And, ASEAN, which came up from a different time, a different era, needs to be repurposed for the challenges of climate change. Because the IPCC has named ASEAN, or rather Southeast Asia, as one of the most vulnerable regions in the world to climate change. And we are seeing it, in Philippines, in Thailand, the floods, Malaysia itself, we have felt it very much. And at the same time, ASEAN is still, we have a country that's very developed like Singapore. But at the same time, we also have many of our countries, even Malaysia, where we still have significant pockets of poverty. So there needs to be economic growth. So how do we do it in such a way that making Southeast Asia or ASEAN climate resilient is very important. So there has been significant progress, I would say, this year. The ASEAN Pavilion, the common position. We also have that declaration on environmental rights, which I believe, was crucial. Obviously, it goes beyond climate alone. But I think, we really need to relook at ASEAN seriously. It can, one of the things that, we like to say that we have 670 million people, which is more than the European Union. But at the same time, ASEAN does not have the same common institutions, even the common forms of government that is there in the EU. So I don't think we can overcome that immediately, but I do think we should be more ambitious with what ASEAN can do, because other than Indonesia, which is one of the bigger economies of the world, the other countries in ASEAN are relatively small, Malaysia included. So when you go to these international conferences, you have G77 China, which I believe is too big and too diverse. We have small island states where Singapore positions itself as well. And we have all these various blocks. But I do believe that ASEAN has, in terms of geography, in terms of history, in terms of the ASEAN organization itself, we have that strong leverage that we should build on. So that is my sense, because when climate change is happening, whether US, we can't control what how the people of the US votes, and this is coming under a lot of pressure globally. I am happy to see that Malaysia, with our latest NDC submissions, we continue to push the envelope. We are very ambitious. We want to play our part. Climate change bill will come next year. I hope National Adaptation Plan will also come as scheduled next year. And this will be very significant for Malaysia. But Malaysia alone as a country, we won't be able to make a lot of difference. But if we come together, and with Philippines taking over the chairmanship of ASEAN, and Philippines is bearing the brunt of a lot of problems to do with climate change, I do think that we should explore this. And ASEAN has also progressed in terms of ASEAN Power Grid. We do hope that we can go further with this. But it is promising, I believe, because in the past we saw that Singapore was talking a lot about making them the center of all this, rather than looking at the ASEAN centrality. But we are going back to the ASEAN Power Grid. That is something that is positive, and it will allow greater adoption of renewable energy. We also know this challenge that we have. Malaysia, one of them, Indonesia. These are all countries with significant fossil fuel interests. And there's this issue that's happening at the COP30 about the roadmap or the transition plan, the phase out for the fossil fuels. We have to be more ambitious. Yes, I agree on just transition. I agree that we need to demand more from the developed countries. But just as in many areas, Malaysia has shown the lead, that being a developing country, we can show ambition in fossil fuels as well. We should show greater ambition. So this can be the model of what high middle income countries like Malaysia can do. Because simply playing the blame game or pushing the buck from one to another is not going to solve this immediate climate crisis, which is already happening before our eyes. And this is what our people are demanding. We can really come up with a model that is ambitious, that is just, and that is fair. And I think it is time that ASEAN's voice is heard louder and more concrete with regards to climate change.
Thank you so much, YB Nik Nazmi, Nik Ahmad, for the very insightful remarks, and also giving insights into what are Malaysia's plans after this. So now, as we are now slowly coming to the close of this program, we'd like to now pass it on to Dr. Gary, the chair of the Council for CGM, to share another concluding message of what has happened throughout these past 10 days. Dr. Gary has certainly played an instrumental role making this program, one of the key people in making this program possible, and we are deeply grateful for this. So let's please join us in welcoming him to give the closing remarks.
Very big thank you to you, Aaron, for the introduction. It's been quite an amazing 2 weeks of our parallel coverage of the COP in Belém, Brazil, in parallel with the activities of the Malaysia Pavilion that's being run by NRES, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Sustainability over there. We hope you've had some opportunity to jump over, given the time difference between Malaysia and Belém, Brazil, and look at some of the events that have been going on there. From the very beginning, this COP was slated to be one that was going to be different. I remember the ambassador of Brazil to Malaysia, Ari, telling us even a year ahead of the COP, what preparations were being made in order to make this very monumental COP one that was above all effective. 33 years from the original Rio Earth Summit, and 30 years into the negotiations, a good 10 years after the adoption of the Paris Agreement, Brazil had very high hopes and expectations for the COP and planned accordingly. From the very start, they wanted to make sure that the key pillars of our endeavors here to address climate change, including adaptation and mitigation, the importance of the just transition, making sure that finance is forthcoming, and then key issues impacting our society, gender issues, forest protection issues. All of these things were made central by the incoming Brazilian presidency. They also wanted to ensure that key issues associated with human civilization and our survival on this planet, things like food security, the energy transition, social integrity and climate justice, all of these things were to be handled in this COP and addressed properly. The strategic agenda that they put forward, involving transitioning energy, industry, and transportation, stewarding with greater detail the forests, the oceans, biodiversity, transforming agriculture and forestry systems, making our cities, our infrastructure, our water resources more resilient. And then in line with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, actually fostering human development, including very importantly social development. And to do this, they highlighted the importance of the cross-cutting feature of accelerators, enablers, the enabling environment, and through all of this, cutting across this, the finance, the technology transfer, and capacity building. There were a number of slogans out there that they wanted this COP to be associated with. They wanted to move from pledges to practice. They wanted this to be the COP of truth, the COP of inclusion, the COP of implementation. And although we haven't heard anything yet coming out of Belém regarding which decisions have actually been adopted at this point in time, and in part because of the fire that broke out and the need to close the venue for the safety of the delegates for a short while. Apparently, everything seems to be back to normal, and we seem to be moving in the right direction. Now, hopefully, when the final plenary resumes and the various decisions come up for adoption, we remain hopeful that this COP will continue to deliver all that is promised. And I think if we listen to YB Nik Nazmi, if we listen to what Edmond has reported from the COP, together with Edward from UNDP, if we listen to Theseira Prof, Dr. Jemilah Mahmood, whom I had on this morning as a guest, I think the general consensus seems to be that the Brazilian presidency created an environment that was highly conducive. In other words, parties were not distracted by issues of, difficulties with the venue. They were not distracted by, long queues in security or other kinds of disruptions, perhaps from interest groups outside. I think that by and large, in terms of execution, this appears to be one of the most well executed COPs that I have in my experience of at least of the 14 COPs I attended, one of the most well executed COPs. Of course, the role of the presidency is to, as a convener, is to actually create the safe space, the conducive space for delegates to come together, either in an official capacity where normally observers are allowed in, and the press can report very transparently on what goes on in the COP. Or on the other hand, if there are informal consultations, meaning that it's kind of a Chatham House rules, and we don't normally allow observers in, and even the closed meetings, how the various coalitions meet, their spaces have to be secure spaces where you can have some level of confidentiality in what you are discussing. All of these things contribute to the success of the COP. And as I was saying, I think that the Brazilian presidency, to its credit, put together just the right kind of COP that we need. And it's been an up and down battle to convince the world that multilateralism is the right way to address this, that the consensus building process, the use of consensus rather than voting, is the way to make sure that all parties are on the same page, even if it can be extremely difficult when a small group, one or a small group of parties attempts to hold up the negotiations. I think overall, the message coming out from the COP is that whomever we wanted to get the message to about climate change has gotten the message. Whether they choose to act on that message or not is a separate thing. But in any case, all of the like-minded and all of the willing partners are in this space to mutually support each other and to mutually collaborate to ensuring that what we want to see as an outcome of this very, very important, this very landmark COP does come to fruition. And so it's been Climate Governance Malaysia's very great pleasure and honor to be able to first of all secure the collaboration with the Ministry of Natural Resources and Sustainability. We are deeply grateful to our colleagues there at the Ministry for agreeing to let CGM participate as a partner in the parallel process. It's been my great pleasure to be able to bring to you some of the updates from the COP. Would not have been possible without our friends at the Climate Action Network, at Third World Network, and a number of other organizations there that are bringing us the news on a daily basis, updates. Also, we are deeply, deeply grateful to members of the CGM Council who have given their time very, very selflessly to help us out in many of these events, especially as moderators, as hosts. And we are particularly indebted to some of our wonderful partners, Mr. Karl Godderis of EUROCham, who's hosted a lot of the CEO segment. A big thank you to you, Karl. To some of our guests who've been on the program with me in the mornings, Stefano from Carlsberg, Nat Tan from The Edge. Always grateful to people like Serena and JD for their insights and for sharing very intimately sometimes how they grew up, the kind of Malaysia they grew up in. Cheryl from Maybank, thank you so much for those insights. I think it speaks a lot that as a country that has changed so much, that we can still find spaces just outside of the capital city where we find so much similar to the way that we grew up. We are deeply grateful to YB Nik Nazmi, who has joined us on a number of occasions, graced us with his presence, his insight, and as a lawmaker and as a parliamentarian, I believe he continues to play a very strong role, despite not having the ministerial portfolio, as a voice for sustainability and climate, even as we continue to have him on our International Advisory Panel, or IAP. Thanks to guests also like Azni, and as you saw this morning, Mr. Edmond from Boston Consulting joining us from Belém. Given even with the time difference, thank you so much for helping us bring this to our Malaysian audience here. Edward from UNDP, thank you very much. And our guest this morning, still jet lagged from her flight back from Belém, Prof. Tan Sri Jemilah Mahmud, the Executive Director of the Sunway Center for Planetary Health, sharing with us her impressions live, from the COP. Also, this event would not have been possible without the very able team working in the background. Of course, you've seen the face of Aryan, but there's a number of other people working very, very tirelessly in the background, making sure that the cast is running smoothly, and making sure that we are on air to bring you the very latest. So thanks to a big shout out to all those working very, very diligently there in the background and bringing you our parallel coverage. And then finally, I think even as we know that we're keeping our fingers crossed and hoping for the very best, we would like to thank you for joining us on this journey. The attendance has varied somewhat from day to day, but we see that some of you, who particularly those who add to the chat list and the Q&A, we are deeply grateful to you for all your comments, your encouragement, your questions, and we would like to be able to continue bringing you the coverage. And I think that as long as we have the kinds of progressive leadership from our elected representatives, from our civil servants, from our institutes of higher learning and our research institutes, as long as we continue to use the institutional memory that we have built, and we do have a great deal of institutional memory still around, hopefully we will continue to produce the right kinds of regulatory frameworks, the right kinds of legislation, the right kinds of taxonomies that can actually bring the investment that we want to see coming to Malaysia, investments in renewable energy, investments in best practices for industrial production, investments in adaptation, science-based measures, nature-based solutions, all of these which are going to be part of a comprehensive and strategic plan to develop Malaysia more sustainably, to move away from fossil fuels, to gradually replace these with a full suite of renewable energies, regardless of whether it's solar related, either solar thermal or solar PV, whether it's wind related, whether it's biogas, bioliquids, biosolids. But the idea really is to leave, as it were, no stone unturned in our quest to turn Malaysia into a sustainable and low carbon society. As mentioned before, we do need all hands on deck if it is going to be an all of society, all of government effort. And with that, and a final note of thanks to all who've been involved in bringing this to you. I take this opportunity on behalf of CGM to thank everyone for helping us out, and have a pleasant day. We hope you continue tuning in to the news as it comes out from Belém. We wish you a very pleasant end of the week. Farewell.
Thank you, Dr. Gary, for the concluding remarks. So now with that, we would like to officially conclude the end of the Malaysian support for the COP30 event. It has been an exciting and meaningful 2 weeks, and we sincerely thank all of you for joining us on the final day of the Malaysian support for the COP30 event. So, before you leave, we'll be grateful if you could complete a short post-session survey form. So a Zoom poll will pop up on your screen. If it doesn't appear, simply click the poll icon at the top left of your screen. We hope you enjoyed the sessions and the discussions throughout the past 10 days, and we look forward to welcoming you to more impacts such as these in the near future. And actually, in fact, on that note, we are pleased to also share that there are 2 upcoming sessions that are already coming up next week, as shown on the screen. So there's the Water Stewardship Roundtable webinar that's taking place on Tuesday, 25th November 2025 from 2:30 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. online. And there's also the Synergizing Foreign Investor and State Climate and Environmental Priorities webinar that's also taking place next Friday, 28 November at 9 a.m. So please kindly scan the QR code to register yourselves for these upcoming 2 events. And to stay informed about these and other initiatives, we encourage you to subscribe to our CGM newsletter. We will also be releasing an impact report summarizing the key outcomes of the Malaysian support for the COP30 event. And in the meantime, if you'd like to revisit any of our sessions, all our recordings are available on our YouTube channel under the playlist of the Malaysian Support for COP30 event. And if you found today's program insightful and even the past sessions insightful, please consider subscribing to our channel and sharing our content with your fellow friends and colleagues to help amplify the work that we do at CGM. Once again, we would like to extend our deepest appreciation to all of the speakers who have contributed to all these sessions that have taken place within the past 10 days, the dedicated team at CGM that's been working tirelessly behind the scenes to manage logistics and coordination to ensure that this has been a fruitful event, and most importantly, to all of you in the audience for your continuous support throughout this journey. And with that, we would like to thank every one of you.